Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to give you a brief welcome before we get started. I'm Maya Elenevsky, the Events and Outreach Manager here at the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society with the Association for Contemplative Mind in Higher Education. The ACMHE is a multidisciplinary academic association with a membership of over 800 educators, staff, students, and researchers committed to the transformation of higher education through contemplative methods. The ACMHE is an initiative of the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society. I'd like to welcome you to our February 2021 Contemplative Education webinar, Learning with the Labyrinth with Madeleine Charney. Madeleine Charney is a librarian at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, specializing in the built and natural environment. She's a soon-to-be certified Veriditas Labyrinth facilitator and a recently certified Koru Mindfulness teacher. We are thrilled to be working with you, Madeleine, and with that, I hand it off to you.
Thank you, Maya, and nice to see you all here. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to tell you about labyrinths, but also weave in some of my own story of how I came to fall in love with this magical experience, which I will also share with you in real time. About halfway through, we'll do a labyrinth meditation together. So just to get you in the mindset of that. I wanted to quote a friend of mine, Sister Lorraine Villemer, who says, "The labyrinth is a path for transformation, a tool for change. The message is in the walking." And as we'll also talk about finger labyrinths, that's another way you can do it right where you're sitting, anywhere. I keep one in my purse. So there's lots of kinds of labyrinths, and they are on every continent on the planet except for Antarctica. So a couple of examples on the upper right, that is called a classical labyrinth. It's a 7-circuit labyrinth. And by that, I mean, you can see my cursor, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 paths, circuits into the center. Whereas the one below it, the Chart labyrinth, has 11 circuits. It's a more complex experience, takes longer, has a different effect on people. And the one on the left-hand side is called a Roman labyrinth. And again, there's many, and I'll show you some more examples along the way. Here's the famous Chart labyrinth. I wonder if any of you have ever been there in France, in the ground floor of a cathedral. And I have aspirations to visit it someday. I have not been so fortunate yet, but it's a very beautiful example. And another reason that people have built labyrinths is if you couldn't make it to a pilgrimage site, this was a safe way to have that kind of experience in place. Like during the Crusades, you didn't really want to venture out. You would stay back in your village and you could walk a labyrinth in your church. Here's Land's End in San Francisco. So an outdoor labyrinth that's made of more rough materials like stones. And you can even make a temporary labyrinth at barely any cost using duct tape. And I have seen a really great video of someone making a labyrinth in literally 1 minute. I mean, granted, he's very good at it. His name is Lars Howlett, and he did it with duct tape and one of these rolling dispensers. And he went in a circle and then tore out the different pieces to make the circuit. So you can really make them almost anywhere. I've seen them made out of cornmeal on a lawn. I've seen them made with string that was anchored with metal pins. You can use chalk. I mean, it's really sort of endless, and they're very portable in that sense. This is called the Man in the Maze. It's a Native American Southwestern pattern. This one happens to be on a basket. And I want to talk a little bit about the history of labyrinths. The word itself comes from the Greek labyrinthos and describes a structure with a single path. And that's important to realize. It's unicursal. You typically walk in one path, arrive at the center, and come out the same path. So you really can't actually get lost, although sometimes you feel like you are getting lost. And that is really part of the experience of not knowing exactly where you're going. Great metaphor for life, especially in these times. We really don't know where we're going as a civilization. At least, well, I don't know. Maybe you do. It's not a maze. You don't get trapped or tricked. It's one path in, and for sure you're going to make it out without getting stuck anywhere. It just feels like a long road sometimes. You have to stay the path. Another great metaphor. So here are some really ancient examples of labyrinths from the Paleolithic and Neolithic periods. And you can see sometimes they appeared on jewelry, scratched into cave walls and stones. They're on, like I said, every continent. So it really is a somewhat universal experience and a great way of sharing cultures. So if you were to think about one on your campus, it would be a very intercultural invitation. And there is an amazing database called the Worldwide Labyrinth Locator. So if you're wondering, where's a labyrinth near my home? Or if you're on a trip and you want to fit in a labyrinth experience, it's a really incredible tool with, I think there's up to like 800 labyrinths there. And I'm going to go to the next slide in a minute, and you'll see that they're very, well, I'm a database nerd, right? As an academic librarian, I'm always thinking about the design of a tool. I'm sure some of you can relate. So it's a really cool database because you can filter not only where they are, but also the kinds, like outdoor, anybody can come. Outdoor, but you need an appointment. Outdoor, you have to open to guests only. Indoor permanent, indoor portable. And this is New England where I live, and you can see there's so many labyrinths. It kind of is amazing when you start to realize just how widespread they are, which means a lot of people are loving on the labyrinth. So why walk a labyrinth? Really, what is the value? A lot of you might already think of it as a tool to just have a relaxing experience, but also it can support you through a time of either confusion or deep emotion. It's a form of prayer for some people, comfort, grounding, healing, like I mentioned, an alternative to actually going on a pilgrimage. I've used them for decision making when I feel stuck. I will like invite that question and then walk into the labyrinth seeking my answer. It can stimulate creativity and increase your concentration, which is a lot about what we talk about in ACMHE, is growing our container so that we as teachers and teaching our students how to increase our capacity for deeper understanding of the material and ourselves in relationship to it. And like I said, stress reduction is one reason, and there's a lot of medical evidence that walking labyrinths can be helpful in stress reduction and other helping with other ailments, which I'll talk about in a moment. So here's my story. In my 27-story library, the Du Bois Library at UMass Amherst, we had an installation of this projected labyrinth back in 2014. And Dr. Donna Zucker, a nursing professor, set up a blood pressure study. So I volunteered to be a subject because I already knew Dr. Zucker. So first you come into the space and she greets you and you choose which shape labyrinth you would like. And you can see those white posters are where I was able to make a selection. Then she projects that labyrinth on the floor, takes your blood pressure, you walk the labyrinth, and she takes the blood pressure after. And this was a whole long study, which you can read the published result in that link at the bottom. And I was fascinated to begin with. And by the time I finished the working with her in the study and talking with her more, I was like completely fascinated and wanted to do more with labyrinths. And by the way, I'm just sort of tickled that this labyrinth actually was designed by a librarian. His name is Matthew Clark, and he currently works at the library at Harvard University. Just an extra little bonus that it was made by a library person. So after I talked with Dr. Zucker, I was soon going to be helping organize a contemplative pedagogy retreat for librarians in the 5-college consortium. And I thought, oh, I wish I could bring a labyrinth into this process. And then Dr. Zucker told me about her friend at the local penitentiary that has a labyrinth that she uses with the incarcerated people. And so she graciously lent me her 25-foot labyrinth, which I brought home in a rolling suitcase. And when I laid it out for my colleagues to walk, many of them reported it was their favorite part of this, I think, almost an all-day retreat. And here are some of the librarians walking the labyrinth. So then I really felt hooked, and I was thinking how great it would be if I could have my own labyrinth. I wouldn't have to borrow from Kathy Regali. And so well, let me back up a minute. Oops, no, I'm going forward. Hold on one second. It's hard to see all the controls. Anyway, pretend you're not looking at that picture. What I did was I joined just by chance. It's called the Association of Mental Health Librarians, and they had a small grant program. So I wrote a proposal to buy my own labyrinth, which you saw in that previous slide, which is a 16-foot. It's painted onto thick canvas. It's a 7-circuit classical labyrinth, like the one that I first showed you. And I brought it around to all these different library conferences. Now, a lot of people have a myth that libraries are such a calm place, and oh, those nice librarians, everything's so organized and it looks so easy. Well, librarians are one of the most stressed out people that you can encounter. Our jobs on the surface look very orderly, and behind the scenes, there's a lot of high tech stress, a lot of change. I've been doing this for 30 years. So we've been on like a roller coaster ride of technology and a lot of different ways of using the library. What started out as a very sort of serene environment, happily is now a very bustling environment, but getting from point A to point B was very labyrinthine indeed. So librarians are very in need of this kind of support. And when I brought it to the conferences, people were really excited about it. And it was really fun for me. Like I would set it up in some sort of off the beaten track, and I would see these colleagues bustling by, and I would say, "Psst, want to walk the labyrinth?" And they would be a little bit sort of confused, and then I would lead them over to this space, and they would have this experience, whether they were on their way to present and needing to calm down, or coming down off of a presentation and wanting to decompress. It was really fun to bring it around. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, because I did bring it to some local libraries. And I mentioned a little bit about finger labyrinths. If you are going to offer a labyrinth walk, it's really kind and the right thing to do to have it for accessibility purposes, that anybody could join by having one portable. This one is a little tiny one. Can you see in my, I think I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Hold on, I'm all over the place here. Stop
Madeleine,
share.
you can see it, just so that you know.
I think it's confusing me, so I'm going to back up.
Perfect.
This little tiny one is so small, you need a little stylus. So you go at the beginning and circle around. I keep this in my purse, and when I'm sitting in a meeting, I'll just ever so discreetly be calming myself with my little labyrinth on my lap. And this is purchased by a nice company somewhere in the Midwest called Relax for Life, relax4life.com. They also make these gorgeous maple labyrinths. This is quite heavy. And it's so wide that I sometimes close my eyes and I trace it with my eyes closed, which is a whole different experience. And it's so pretty that they put a little divot so you can hang it up, because it really is like a piece of art. And then a friend of mine made this one maybe for children or someone who's blind. It's raised, embroidered, and on fabric, so you can wash it. So it's endless. When I did my Veriditas training, people were from around the world, 25 of us, were showing like all these labyrinths that they'd made out of different materials and sewn them on pillows that they took to bed with them. I mean, it's just like such a world of creativity. Okay, so and also teachers, I often have one of these just printed out on paper, sitting at the desks when my students arrive for a library information session, and I use it as a transitional tool. So while they're bustling in and plopping their backpacks down, I invite them to settle down, and when everybody's centered a little bit, I give them some quiet time to do a tracing either with their finger or the back of a pen or just with the pen itself. And then give a sort of short metaphor about how doing research is actually like walking a labyrinth. You have to really have some determination. You sort of know where you're going, but part of the fun of doing research is getting lost and finding yourself again. So a lot of them seem to resonate with that. And if you go to the Labyrinth Society, the webpage, you can download this classical labyrinth, and I think they also have the more complex 11 circuit chart labyrinth. So I'm going to go back to my sharing now. Okay, like I said, I brought these to a couple of local libraries when I was on sabbatical, just for fun. I brought it to my town library. Well, I walked in that day. I used to work there 30 years ago, so I know a lot of the people and I know the place. And there was like a weird vibe in the air. Something very difficult had just happened with a patron, and there was like a lingering, stressy feeling in the air. And I said, well, hi, I'm setting up the labyrinth downstairs, and on their lunch breaks. And, you know, they came down one or two or a few at a time. And these were the kind of things that they said to me. So just take a moment and look at their experience. So what I'm noticing is they felt seen. They felt cared about. This is a public library. They said the town offers stuff, but nothing for us, the hardworking library staff. And also like having a tough day, feeling like, oh, this was such a relief. And even more globally, like you should bring this to Washington, D.C. This was during, I forget exactly what was going on. There's so much politically these days, but it was like something had recently erupted and people were thinking like, we need this kind of thing, you know, in many, many places. And so then I also brought it to Amherst College another day, and I'll show you what their response was. Oh, sorry, I have to go back. I don't know why I can't seem to see the arrows.
I think
I know. I got it with my, okay, here's Amherst College. So they're noticing the pause in the middle, very powerful, which we'll talk about in our meditation in a moment. Noticing how they walk, feeling lost, but found again. It's quite fascinating and very individual. And I've seen people run through a labyrinth. I've seen people take like an hour to walk my labyrinth. It's your experience. You can crawl if you want to. I've seen someone dance. I brought it to my son's fourth grade class, and the teacher took a turn at the end. She was literally leaping. She was like, oh my gosh, this has to do with growth mindset. I'm like, uh-huh. She's like, can you come back at the beginning of school next year? Yep. Like, people have these epiphanies on the labyrinth. I've witnessed it over and over again. Fascinating. So I am going to pause. Maya, I think we agreed, right? This is where I take some questions, and then we're going to go on to the more like, how does this work in an academic setting?
Yeah, so if anyone would like to share, you should have the ability to unmute yourselves. But if not,
I see a raised hand from Justine.
Hi, thank you so much, Madeleine. I have a question on how you use the labyrinth in your purse during meetings. Because it's clear I need to buy that.
Oh, yes, you do,
so
Justine.
What do you think? It's so different from walking. It feels very different to me from walking and focusing on your steps as you walk a labyrinth, which I have done. I don't quite understand how I can translate it into secretly into a meeting session. So help me with that.
Well, it is a different experience. It's much more contained. But what I do is I just like let the shape of it like work its magic on me. It looks like a brain. It's not coincidental that it has an effect on balancing the hemispheres of the brain. So I don't think too much about it. I just like put my feet flat on the ground and take some breaths as I just use the stylus to go through the labyrinth. I can't say, I've consciously thought through exactly what I'm doing. It works. It's like you have to take a bite of the apple to know what the apple tastes like. So
all right,
I
thank
suggest,
you so much.
Yeah, they're really fun. And I give these as gifts too to people.
So I see some other hands raised. Please feel free to just go ahead and unmute yourself unless you're having issues doing so.
Hi, Madeleine.
Hi.
Paula. Yeah, my question is about entering the labyrinth. What is usually, do you set an intention? Because I've walked it a couple of times, but never really got any instructions. And
yeah.
then the other question is, what do you do in the middle when you've arrived right there?
Okay, good question. When I take you through our meditation in a moment, I'll give you a little preview. There's different ways to set an intention. And I do recommend you don't just sort of, start jumping right in there. It is good to kind of pause and consider, like, what is the reason I want to take this walk at this moment? So when we do ours together, we're going to do what's somewhat traditional is to, on the way in is emptying out and just like making space so that when you arrive in the middle, you can get back to your intention. And then as you're leaving the labyrinth, you're integrating. How am I going to make this manifest in real time or somewhere in my life? So it is a 3-part experience traditionally: the emptying, the receiving, and the integrating. But like I said, you might be grappling with like a very deep personal issue and you just need to grieve your way in and out of the labyrinth. There's not a rule. There's just many, many approaches. And there's also many books written on it. In my bag of labyrinth tricks, I have a beautiful book of labyrinth poetry that I sometimes leave at the opening on a chair. And for people who are still unclear, like, what is this going to help me with? Read a little poem, get an inspiration, and see where that takes you on your labyrinth journey. You don't have to have like, a proposal written to take a labyrinth walk. You just sort of like explore. And like I said, a lot of people new to it came out the other end. They're just like, whoa, I did not see that coming. Something new that they discovered about themselves. So I hope that answers your question enough for now.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? It looks like Katja, are you trying to share?
Oh, you somehow keep getting muted. Let me.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So thank you for this presentation. I've worked some with labyrinths and just love it. And I'm always learning from it. And I wondered if you could speak to where you found your labyrinth or where one could look for a labyrinth. And another question I have is more, I've done labyrinth with large groups, and and it's always interesting that sometimes there can be almost like a little traffic jam that occurs.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I've played with asking people to wait some number of seconds before they start. But also there's something kind of interesting about what happens when we encounter one another, and how can we make room for one another.
Mm-hmm.
I just would love to hear any thoughts you have.
Okay, so good questions. You're really talking about this whole sort of physicality of it, and like, circulation patterns and foot traffic. And I love that stuff. I have a master's degree in landscape design. So we talk a lot about how people like are in relationship with each other and in spaces. So I love this stuff. And it's funny because like a friend of mine knew that I was going to do this Veriditas Labyrinth facilitator training. She's like, what is there to know? It's like, well, there's a lot, like when you invite people to do a labyrinth, you really want them to feel comfortable and like flowing in the space. So I'm glad you're thinking of these things. You also sound like a good candidate for this training. And some labyrinth.
I'm interested in that. I'm going to have to look that up.
Yes, please do. And for anybody, be in touch with me after today. I can tell you about my experience because I really learned a lot about how to do it even better. So to answer in brief, some labyrinths actually have like a little circle in the design where someone can step off and let someone pass, because sometimes you're going more slowly and they're in more of like a faster stride. But what you said is significant. And I remember the day I brought it to the public library, there was a group doing it at one time, and it did, on some subtle level, I could see it was about their relationship to each other and how they respectfully moved about this experience in a group. And I think it can really be a beautiful way for strangers and coworkers or people that are acquainted to really experience like being in that kind of proximity and paying attention to one another while you're also having your own experience. And of course, there is pacing. Like if you're inviting a larger group, you're gonna wait. And there's actually like a formula of like how long you wait. I don't have it in front of me, it's in my training book, but how you would pace a group to move in and out of a particular style and size of the labyrinth. It's actually somewhat mathematical if you need it to be that, pre-planned. So I hope that answers a little bit. Your questions are great.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Madeleine, there was a question that came in through the chat from Robert, asking if there is a reason for the 6 round areas at the center of the Chartres labyrinth in France. I hope I pronounced that right.
Oh yeah, Chartres.
Oh, Chartres.
I know that there is a stylistic reason, and but I don't know it off the top of my head. I have seen people, being together in that pattern and, experiencing something together in the center, like you could sing together. But I don't have any like great examples to explain. I'd have to like go back into my books and maybe look at the history of that design, but really good question. If there's nothing else, I will go on. Okay. So now I'm going to shift into, well, we'll do our labyrinth meditation, but then I'll also talk about, as educators, most of us, or I'm assuming many of us, work on campuses. So I'll speak to that. And like I said, the training was amazing. It had to be virtual because of the times that we're in, but there were people from Hong Kong, Bangkok, St. Johannesburg, someone from Nigeria. I mean, it was really intercultural, and it was just an incredible experience. And the teacher for the main training is Lauren Artress, who basically brought labyrinths back into like the modern mainstream. She's out in San Francisco, and she's an amazing teacher, Lauren Artress. So here's our basic practice. So I'm going to think of this as a pause in the middle of our time together. And like I said, when I show you the labyrinth in a minute, I want you to consider how our virtual walk-in is going to be like a releasing time and emptying. And I want you to start thinking about something that you might like to receive today when you get to the center of this labyrinth. Whether you're needing just something in this moment, or it's something in your day, or something bigger in your life. Just taking like a little bit of time. And I'm going to set my timer right now so that we just do this for, I'm going to do 5 minutes, walking in and walking out. So it will be rather brief. A typical labyrinth walk is about, depending on the size, about 20 to 30 minutes if you do it at a steady, slow pace, but we'll just do a 5-minute introduction. So we're going to walk in, releasing, emptying, making space. When we get to the center, what is it that you would like to receive right now in your day, in your life? And then as we make our way out, how do you see that integrating and bringing it forth into your actual lived experience? This is a beautiful labyrinth. I've never been there myself, but I love that it's sand. And I feel like I'm in this open air. And even looking at images of greenery, studies have shown that it helps to reduce people's blood pressure and bring equanimity to them, even just images. So what I want to do is ask you to put both of your feet on the ground. If you want to turn your camera off, some people are more comfortable, because I'm going to invite you, if you would like, to close your eyes or just gaze down at the in front of you loosely, and just taking a moment to just settle in, noticing the breath. We're going to start our journey in a moment, and we're going to be emptying out. And I want to invite you to start by stepping onto the sand. You can look at the image if you like, or just imagine yourself walking in a pattern around and heading toward the middle, but as slowly as you would like. Maybe imagining that you're barefoot, if that's comfortable for you, and how your feet might feel as they press gently into the warm sand. And slowly making our way as we empty out, opening up to receiving. Noticing sensations, whatever they are. And just slowly making our way step by step. You could imagine you're actually on this labyrinth and how the wind might feel, gently blowing, touching our skin, how the sunshine might feel, warming us. Maybe just feeling our feet, or we might be feeling our whole body moving through space. And just expanding into an empty, open experience. And as we approach the center of the labyrinth, this one has a basin. Not all of them do. Some are just open. In this labyrinth, when we reach the middle, we can look into the center and see if what we've asked for shows up in a visible form or just a knowing, and asking for what we need either in this moment or in our day, or more broadly, just asking for what we need in our life. And arriving at the center and pausing and having, let's take a moment and really receive what that gift is that we've asked for. Either feeling it in our whole body or breathing it in, or other senses that you might want to use to receive this gift that you've asked for. And with this gift, we're going to turn back to the path from where we came and begin our walk back, integrating this gift, bringing it into our lived experience in this moment, in this day, or in our life. And feeling the ground beneath us as we step. And just taking about half a minute to return to the opening of the labyrinth where we started. Now, with this gift that we've asked for and received, and we integrate into our own experience going forward. And welcome back. If you want to flutter your eyes if they've been closed, or maybe do a few shoulder rolls backwards or forwards, or shake your feet or hands a little bit, returning to the space together. And if anybody would like to just share, you can just unmute yourselves, and if anything occurred to you or a certain sensation that you want to tell the others about.
Hi, it's Paula. Hi, Matt.
Hi,
Hi,
hello.
everybody. Thank you so much for that. That was beautiful. I have my own mini labyrinth here
Uh-huh.
that I got the very first time I ever encountered a labyrinth. And
Wow.
so this was this took me back to my first ever silent retreat.
Mm.
And so yeah, I was looking for clarity and comfort.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never used the mini labyrinth. I just bought it as a souvenir, and I used it just now with the pen.
Oh.
Yes. And it brought me the comfort and clarity that I needed. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I just want to thank you for that. And it was a beautiful experience. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for sharing, Paula.
Brought me to tears. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'll just wait another minute if anybody feels moved to share.
I would like to share.
Please.
I'm a retired teacher, very recently retired. And in my meditation with you right now, I need to thank you because I've been thinking how I was an elementary school teacher and a trainer of teachers, how to bring more of these contemplative tools to schools. And I was just envisioning every single playground in elementary schools should have a labyrinth. So I'm going to contact the school and I'm going to make a labyrinth in the school where I was. And I just thank you because I really think that I have more clarity during the meditation. It's just do it. We think too many times and we spend too much time how to do something.
Yeah.
And then, thank you, Madeleine. I'm just going to do it very soon. I'm going to make a labyrinth in the school where I used to teach.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And all you really need in some cases is chalk. Chalk on asphalt and COVID friendly. Outside, if that's possible, spaced enough. And thank you so much. I'm so excited. I got a little shiver when you started talking about your school. And I did it with this 4th grade class, and it was so amazing. I could just talk about that in a different webinar. Each kid's experience and also like, occupational therapy wise, like what they were experiencing physically. But one thing I wanted to say about COVID is that there is a design or many designs that are called processional labyrinths, where you actually start on one end and you go through and out the other end. You don't circle back. And if you find that there's some pushback, any of you who want to make a labyrinth, think about what are called processional labyrinths, and you can make a case for like, we're not even going to be next to each other. We're going to walk one end and out the other. So I just wanted to make a side note of that as we maybe some of us pursue these in actuality. Okay, that's a great segue for me to go on because I want to talk about an exploration around doing these on campuses, or it could be in schools. So in higher education, really in any level of education, consider how many disciplines could make a lesson around a labyrinth. History, anthropology, neuroscience, as I talked about, it's not shaped like a brain, it's not a coincidence. Psychology, religion, the built environment, dance, theater. There's so many reasons that you might want to bring a class to a labyrinth or send students on a labyrinth walk if that was something they were, interested in. Again, it's stress reducing, it's embodied learning, it honors other ways of knowing, not just book knowing and, head, neck up knowing. It also signals to a community that their well-being is considered. When you see a labyrinth on a campus, like somebody cared enough to make that happen, and they want us to feel good and learn in new ways. They're also really beautiful and fun. So there's books that can help you to think about this. The one on the right, Learning with the Labyrinth, is filled with case studies from around the world of big, small labyrinths, all kinds of labyrinths. And also on the left, more generally, I'm sure many of you are familiar with these books about contemplative practices in higher ed. And in my own library profession, we are just bursting with conversations around contemplative pedagogy. So I just wanted to point that out to the non-librarians amongst us. Nancy Gibbon Gibson, I saw you on the call. Nancy is the lead person on our higher education contemplative pedagogy library group. That's ACRL is the Association for College and Research Libraries. We have more than 600 members in that group. And for people on Facebook, there's a Facebook group that has over 3,000 members. So I'm telling you, librarians need this stuff, and they're flocking to this kind of thing. And we also have a lot of literature coming out. The Mindful Librarian, Recipes for Mindfulness in Your Library, which is a collection of stories that I helped to edit, which are really beautiful. So librarians are, getting into this. And here are some examples at universities. So here's American University in Washington, D.C. And you can see now a range of materials. This looks like some kind of maybe bluestone with a sort of low maintenance planting in the borders. And that's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 circuit labyrinth. So wide paths. It looks like wheelchairs would work just fine on that. Another consideration is ADA compliance. Here is Florida State University. Interesting, they put lights in, and it's next to a parking lot. So where a library is placed is really like a very important part of people's experience. You want it private enough that people feel like they can really let down their guard and relax, but you also want it to be discoverable. If it's like tucked away on a hillside, people aren't going to walk by and say, "Ooh, what's that?" So it's this balance, and also safety, that, there aren't high shrubs where, someone would feel like vulnerable. So it's a really interesting balancing act of placement of a labyrinth anywhere. This one is quite simple and rustic. It's at Wellesley College, just made out of tree stumps. I actually have a friend who lives nearby. She calls it the decomposing labyrinth. She made it out of fallen logs and then inoculated the logs with mushrooms. So over time, mushrooms are growing and fading out, and the whole thing will eventually just decompose into the ground, which is a whole metaphor in itself about life. So lots of creative ones out there. Here's Berea College. It looks like that's outside maybe a student dorm. So there's a group of students on their labyrinth. And then on my own campus, I know this probably won't register because you're not, in our community, but if you look at that, you know what? That's not a good picture. I'm going to go on. I'm going to show you this one. We just built this beautiful wide brick pathway that was like a historic walkway that got sort of renovated. And along this pathway called Ellis Way, we're going to have our own labyrinth. It's going to take a while, but there's a group working on it, which I'll talk about. And if you could imagine that little circle, can you see my cursor there? So I went to the campus planning committee, and I thought they were going to laugh me out of the room. Like, what, a labyrinth? Much to my pleasure, they were like, what a great idea. What are you thinking about? And I was in the planning office with the head landscape architect and these giant maps. And they immediately like, well, what about this place? What about that place? And we started just brainstorming out loud at the first meeting. I did write a small proposal. It wasn't I just like knocked on their door, but they looked at my idea, and we started thinking about it. So the place where it probably will be is tucked in between these trees on this Ellis Way. And they said to me, they heard me talking about it and dimensions, and they said, no, I think you're going way too small. They thought I was being like too modest. They would like to build a 50-foot plaza, basically, of permanent stone. And they said, we're the flagship campus. We want this to be really impressive. And so it will be interesting how it really kind of comes to pass, because on some level, if you make a labyrinth really big, it takes a long time to walk it. Not everybody has the time, and it can be rather tiring to get to the middle and out again. So we're going to be, working on this over time. And a graduate student in the regional planning department actually is using the labyrinth as her independent study. And she's the one now researching materials and other potential sites. So it is going to be a process. And now, slowed down by the pandemic, it's going to take a while, but they are still interested. I was very concerned that they would just drop it and say, oh, come on, nobody's going to fund this thing. But in fact, it's needed more than ever. We need to tend to our well-being. We want to make an offering to the campus. It's also, because we're a public campus, an offering to anybody in the community can come to UMass Amherst and walk this labyrinth when the day comes that we can build it. Price tag for this one that they were proposing was $250,000. So that's another reason to maybe scale it down a little bit. But I'm just trying to throw out some numbers and dimensions for you to start mulling over in your own mind. This is what they're proposing is very high end, all the way down to I might just do some chalk ones just to get people on my campus excited about it, or do one with cornmeal, or like I said, this kind of colorful tape that's secured with these metal little sort of staples. So there's a lot of range. Obviously, I'm going from the most modest to the most sort of high end, but I'm excited. The conversation is still happening. And I think, do I have another slide after that? Well, I wanted to give a shout out to some of my teachers. Donna Zucker, the nursing professor I mentioned, and also we have an amazing contemplative pedagogy group on my campus, which I really consider my work family. And then there's a beautiful book called Labyrinth Reflections by Kathy Regali, who's the nurse that lent me that first giant 25-foot canvas labyrinth, and Sister Lori, who I quoted in the beginning. Lauren Artress, who I also want to tip my hat to, who I mentioned does the Veriditas training, and then the Association of Mental Health Librarians, who graciously granted me the funds to buy my canvas labyrinth, which I plan to keep bringing around in my community. And that's what I wanted to share today. I see we have a few more minutes if people want to ask any more questions.
Yeah, and I'll open the chat for this. So if anyone would rather chat their question in, you can feel free to do that.
Hi, I do have a question actually.
Yeah.
So I'm Jana, and I'm calling from Canada, on the East Coast, and I'm wondering at how much of a case needs to be made in terms of multicultural inclusion, because you said that you can find labyrinths in many cultures and across the world and that kind of thing. But when you're trying to make your case to people in higher education, how much of a argument do you have to make for it?
Mm-hmm.
That it will be inclusive?
Well, I mean, it's right out there in the open. For one thing, anybody could just walk up to it, and it's just a offering that's out there. I think that it just sort of has a universal appeal. I don't mean to sound vague, but I think it's just so inviting in and of itself. And signage would be a way to let people know this isn't, some people do associate with churches. And you could choose a design that's more, man in the maze instead of a traditional classical one that comes from Greece. So design could play into it. Educating people with handouts to remind them that this is a really universal experience in the class as you prepare the students before they're as part of the assignment. You could talk about labyrinths around the world. So there's lots of literature that would support it. And by the way, speaking of buy-in, as I've been talking this up on my campus over maybe 2 years now, anytime someone would say, oh, that sounds interesting, I would put them on my list So you want to be on the update list. And every like few months, I call them the Labyrinth lovers. And I just keep it really light and airy, like, hi, Labyrinth lovers. Gloria McPherson is the new grad student working on this. Like, oh, this is still happening. Just not letting it fade and building in an interdisciplinary group that is getting a little bit invested in it. And some of them have come. I've done some workshops on campus. When we were together physically, we walked my Canvas labyrinth. I've now done a couple online through my library's workshops. So building up some momentum, because you don't want to do this alone. There's a lot of pieces to the project. So I hope that answers your question. And to the portable labyrinths, it's Relax for Life. They sell canvas ones, and I think I bought mine from, it's called like the Labyrinth Company. And also you can make them. If you have a steady hand and you stencil a design, you can paint on like a big piece of canvas or sailcloth and, roll it up and carry it around. And yes, the recording will be shared. And the book that I showed you was called Learning with the Labyrinth by Jan Sellers, but there's other ones as well. It looks like we're nearing our time.
Yeah, and Madeleine, maybe we'll just touch base before we send the recording to everyone so that we can include all of the books that you mentioned and other resources, because this was just full of information. And we'll just see if anyone else has any questions before we wrap things up.
I'm getting a shout out from Marcia. Hi, Marcia. Koru Mindfulness. By the way, it is a really wonderful 4-week curriculum that exposes emerging adults, like typical college age students, to a range of mindfulness and meditation practices. And I recently was certified as a Koru Mindfulness teacher. So I want to, like Marcia, make a little pitch for it. It really is a great program, I think, if any of you want to become more formally trained to teach meditation to college age students and other people too.
And it dovetails nicely with the Labyrinth, I think. So
thank you, Marcia.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Madeleine. I've been hearing about your work with labyrinths for a long time, and I remember I believe you brought the portable one to one of the ACMHE conferences. So it's really great to finally see the presentation that goes along with it and just hear about your story. It was really great. So thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today. We'll be in touch again soon with the recording and resources. And until then, be well. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.